Thank you, Allison, and welcome everybody to another Better Normal. This one is called Hope and Progress, No Matter What. And we're saying that because, of course, this election that's coming up and is making us all very anxious. So we want to give a little bit of soothing and sort of looking at the future that we hope will be coming soon. We obviously encourage everybody who hasn't voted so far to please vote. That's really important. And we also believe, and we'll talk about that no matter what happens, the incredible progress that the ACEs movement has made will continue. And definitely that's our promise. So in addition to you who have joined us today, and thank you for doing that, we're pleased to feature 4 ACEs Science veterans. Kathleen Pitratobi from the Cambia Health Foundation, which is co-hosting this Better Normal. And Ingrid Cochran, who is our community facilitator from the Midwest, and she lives in Tennessee. Terry Allison, who is co-founder of the Resilient Santa Barbara initiative, and she's obviously from Santa Barbara. And Brian Simpson is also supposed to be here, and he is one of the co-community managers at the Fresno Trauma and Resilience Network in Fresno, California. So Kathleen is Director of Operations for Cambia Health Foundation, and she and Cambia and all the people in Cambia have been immersed in ACEs science for quite a few years. So welcome, Kathleen, and give us a few words of introduction.
Sure. Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. And hello from Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm really pleased to be here with you. And I could see there are a couple other Salt Lake or Utah natives or residents here with us. And hello to Alan and my colleagues from Utah. So it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you again. My name is Kathleen Pitratobi. I'm far from an expert or clinician regards to ACEs. What I am is an ally and an advocate and a firm believer in ACE science. And what we've tried to do is invest in projects that try and address the impact of ACEs and toxic stress on children and build resiliency and recognize protective factors and what we can do to help children and adults and put them on a healthier trajectory in life. So it's really an honor to do this great work. And I talked to Jane a little bit yesterday. I think we all have a personal connection and link to this. And that's what drives our work and why we're here every day and so passionate about bringing awareness to this issue. Couple just quick notes. I mean, this was really a connection to my family and to my mom, who has multiple ACEs. And I could see from her experiences growing up and the health problems she's having now, once you read about the ACEs, you can draw all these little connections and see how it plays out in a person's life. So that's certainly one of my motivations to staying engaged. And then I also, several years ago, saw Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who I'm sure you all know, speak at a conference in Orlando, and she talked about ACEs, and she does this presentation. I just saw it again the other day, where she puts up the grizzly bear and talks about that response that your body has to trauma, and how there can be kind of a natural, normal response, quote unquote, but then also how it can just trigger trauma and all kinds of physiological as well as mental problems for children and adults. So we've always been interested in how can we intervene as early as possible in a child's life and provide them with resiliency and protective factors and get them back on track and help adults so that they can live their very, very best and healthiest life. Cambia Health Foundation is based in Portland, Oregon, but we do grant making in our 4-state region, which is Utah, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And Steve Lesky is the senior program officer that oversees our whole person care initiative. And he is more of an expert than I am actually in this subject area. And he's fantastic if you ever need to reach out to him and have questions about our foundation. But with that, I will just give my heartfelt thanks to all of you for the work that you do. This is so important, more important than ever, given the pandemic, racial justice issues, as our country confronts institutional racism, and the impact that that has had in all sectors of society. This work could not be more important. And so we're privileged to be co-hosts of this great event, and I look forward to learning from all of you. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Kathleen. Very much appreciate your I guess dedication to all of this and to ACES science and all the work that's being done. We obviously couldn't do it without your interest and your support, and we are very grateful for it. I just wanted to let you all know that the ACES movement really wasn't very robust, even I would say maybe 8 years ago. If I was trying to find articles that have been written about ACES science, it was really hard to find. But now it's much easier, and there's a lot more activity going on. And in fact, PBS is going to be doing a 4-part series about ACES science. And I just talked with one of the producers a couple days ago, and they're going to send some folks to Montana, to California, and I forget where the other parts are going to be. But I just think it's terrific for the ACES movement to get that kind of attention and support and exposure to what people are doing that is really making a difference in this. As I think I was surprised when I started this that there really wasn't much going on in the ACES movement, but now 8 years later, I think it's growing exponentially, thanks to all of you here and your neighbors and friends and colleagues. Most states have done an ACE survey, and that many of them have expanded what the ACE study itself did into other aspects of ACEs, including racism and bullying and involvement in the foster care community. It's pretty remarkable what has happened. There are quite a few states that are including ACEs practices based on ACEs science in their state legislation, which I think is really wonderful. And that's because if we don't get this into policy and practice, it'll never happen. So we celebrate that when we see it. There are state level initiatives in at least several states, including Delaware, California, Minnesota, and New Jersey. And that's all happened in the last couple of years. So I think we're making pretty good progress. Now, I know that there's probably, I would say probably 2,000 or 3,000, maybe more schools that are integrating trauma-informed practices. And many of the schools no longer have to expel or suspend the kids, and the teachers are happier and they stay longer. It's remarkable when people start integrating this knowledge into their work. There are patients and physicians who are working together to successfully manage addiction to opioids, so that 100% of those patients hold on a job, which is a good measure of success. Batterer intervention programs reduce recidivism from 60% to 1% using this knowledge. Safe Babies courts show that after participating in their wraparound approach that integrates ACEs science, 99% of the kids suffer no further abuse after 1 year, which is really remarkable. In some places that have social service agencies that have integrated and communities that have integrated, ACEs science, youth suicide drops 98%. In a US county where they got law enforcement, health services, and rehab services together, and they started a program where they helped people who had addiction problems and had an overdose. They helped them find a place in rehab, and it was such a remarkable progress there that deaths from opioids dropped 26%, while in an adjacent county, deaths increased 84%. So this stuff works. I mean, it's important to realize that that a lot of these programs have been replicated and are available for certainly a lot of people on ACEs Connection are using them. And if you're interested in connecting with people who are doing it, we'd be glad to do that. So ACEs Connection is a community of action, and our role in the ACEs movement is to inform people, to accelerate the movement, and to support communities in cities and towns and counties and states and nations to start and grow ACEs initiatives with the intent of solving our most intractable problems, some of which I just mentioned. We have nearly 50,000 members, and that's growing. We have more than 300 ACEs initiatives that are part of ACEs Connection, and we provide tools and guidelines that help communities measure their progress. We nudge politely but persistently because we don't think that there's time to waste in getting people to adopt this. Our goal is 1,000 communities in the next 3 years and 5,000 in 5 years. And we think that 5,000 will be a tipping point. So where this will spread without a lot of nudging. There are 34,000 cities and counties in the United States, and eventually we're hoping that every organization and every community will be integrating ACEs science. Now, more than 7 months ago, the pandemic exposed the great chasms that are plaguing us today. Not to be have words that pun this, but that's exactly where we are. And after the pandemic hit, the brutal murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery even exposed the chasms even further. So as tragic as this time has been, it still opened a stunning vista of opportunity to many people in the ACEs community who said, now is our time to actually do something, and we're going to take advantage of it. So I want to bring Ingrid Cochran in here now to talk about one aspect of this, which is the extreme structural inequity and structural racism that we have in this country. And I think that more people are getting a better understanding of as time goes on. I think it's been a huge awakening. And I think that we are doing what we can to keep that momentum going, because we don't think this is something that should drop. So Ingrid, if you could talk a little bit about what the relationship is between ACEs, racism, and inequity, I think that we'd be pleased to hear that.
Thank you, Jane. I think that there's so much to unpack when we look at the intersection of race or racism and ACEs. So we already know that there's a lot of research to support that people of color, and I'm speaking specifically about Indigenous people, African Americans, and the Latinx community, are experiencing more complex trauma. And I remember when I first started in collective impact around ACEs, so much of the rhetoric was, this is kind of the great equalizer. When we're looking at trauma, All groups of people are experiencing trauma. And even when I first started, we were a part of a movement that really wanted to look at messaging. And we worked with the Frameworks Institute to come up with messaging that would be, that would get the most support from the public. And often it was the message of all children, all communities. And that's a great message. And I don't think we should take away from it, but we cannot ignore that some communities are experiencing more complex trauma. Some communities are experiencing racial trauma. Some communities are experiencing or have been experiencing historical trauma through centuries. And that this has created a chasm of a lot of issues. So obviously, we know that when we experience high levels of stress and trauma, that it has an impact on our brain's functioning. And we also know that this leads to issues of mental illness, stress, depression, anxiety. But then on the next level, when we think about the systems approach, then it leads to communities, neighborhoods being more likely to experience violence. It leads to lack of access to care. It leads to a lot of different issues that are going to be exacerbated when we add in another layer of the color of skin. And this issue has been looked at in a totally perverse manner up until this point. One of the ways that I was able to really conceptualize the lack of understanding when it comes to racism, at least here in America, was my work in the medical field. So as I interact with pediatricians and doctors who are looking to be trauma-informed and work on health equity, the fact that they're still stuck in this idea of genetic race was one of the issues that was, hard to get around. The belief that African Americans are predisposed to issues of diabetes and high blood pressure, as opposed to the understanding that the hostile environment of racism is creating chronic stress-related diseases within certain communities. And this is a complete shift in our understanding of the world, because so much of the stress and trauma that is experienced in communities of color is due to racism. It's due to how the mainstream society sees them, the beliefs and values that we have around people of color, the economic exploitation of people of color, the redlining and the creation of dangerous neighborhoods that are specific to people of color, the way that we demonize parents of color who are attempting to raise their children in a way to embed them within a racist society that's survival focused, that's built on the parenting practices of that have weathered through genocide and slavery. We totally view these issues as lifestyle issues, as issue of culture, without acknowledging so much stress and trauma and anxiety that comes along with having darker skin in our society. We act as though that these issues just happen in a vacuum, that we believe the understanding that certain groups are more likely to be criminal based on skin color. Certain groups are more likely to be sick based on skin color, even though, again, we do not have a genetic race. This means that as we take this understanding of ACEs science and the understanding that we have about epigenetics and generational transmission of trauma, now we have to understand that, there is a chicken and egg situation here. And so racism is the chicken, it's first. And that has created all of the different issues of disparity and inequity. And that largely these disparities and inequities are rooted deeply in greed and the way that our system is set up to economically exploit people of color, either for land or for free labor. And that this has effectively traumatized large groups of people over hundreds of years. And that is the reason why we have such disparities and inequities that are impacting certain communities over others. And so I hope that as we move forward, especially with the information that we're getting from the data around COVID-19, that we can shift this perspective, that we can shift it from, well, people of color, specifically indigenous, Latinx and African Americans are more impacted by COVID-19 because they have poor health, or because they are more likely to be living in poverty. So then what's the next level? Well, why do certain groups have poor health? Why are certain groups more likely to live in poverty? We have been told the historical story that these groups are deficient and less than based on their genetics, based on the color of their skin. And this is just not true. And hopefully we can move forward with a different perspective on these disparities.
That's, yeah, you had about like 5 or 6 really profound things that you said in there that we could talk about for an hour each. Why do you think it's important to study historical racism?
So I think it's important because, for several reasons. First, we have short memories and we have short attention spans. There's so much going on in the world that we are kind of moving at the speed of light especially now. And what happens is we come around and hit up against this issue of race over and over and over again. And we think, oh, we solved this in when slavery ended. We solved this when we created treaties with indigenous people. We solved this after Jim Crow. We solved this during the Civil Rights Movement. We solved this when Obama was president. And, all of these different beliefs that we have that we want to be able to move forward from these issues of race and racism. And we spend a lot of money to do so. Here in Tennessee, we spent a lot of money to address disparities in educational attainment. There's a lot of money being spent on health equity. Great interventions are being put in place to address these issues. And I assume that these initiatives are well-meaning. However, they don't address the elephant in the room, which is that we live in a racist society. And because our society is racist and has always been racist, then we are looking at the fallout that comes along with that. And instead we try to put Band-Aids on it. We throw money at the issue, not enough, but we throw some. And we put together these great research-based initiatives, and we still don't get the results we want because the implementation is done by biased people embedded within a biased system, which still has the overarching belief that people of color are less than, are deficient, are not capable, as opposed to these groups have been effectively incapacitated by skin color. And that is systemic in its nature. So it is in their homes, it is in their neighborhoods, it is embedded in policy, it is in higher education, it is in the way that we write our history books and who we say are the winners and the losers. It is embedded within our economy, and it also is embedded within us. We all have these beliefs because we are also embedded within the system, and your biases can be detected as early as 3 years of age. So if I believe as an individual that the child I'm teaching has a less bright future because of this color of their skin, I may have lower expectations of that child. I may treat them differently than I would treat another child. And so those one-on-one interactions all the way up to the large level beliefs and values that we hold that are unsaid around race, all of that is still impacting us today.
You know, you and I have talked about the racial awakening that's going on. And you and I have also talked about how we think that if people don't incorporate the knowledge about ACEs science into this, that people who have really good intention are not going to achieve their goals. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, I'm probably, which is ironic because the title of this of this program, I am pessimistic when it comes to issues of race, especially because of the historical view and the kind of the ebbs and flows of racial issues in this country. Over and over again, we've had plenty of great initiatives, lots of research, lots of data that would suggest that there are certain embedded issues that are driving inequity and disparity. And over again, we choose to blame the individuals. We rely on institutions, even in the ACEs movement. We are dedicated to our institutions. We are relying on these state level, federally funded, large agencies, large nonprofits, and even our local police departments, social services, health departments. These are the same institutions that have created the issues that we're dealing with, as they continue to operate in ways that do not create or just don't, give restitution for the things they've done in the past. As we continue to rely heavily on these systems that have also gotten us here, then we will continue to have these issues. We don't want to get rid of the systems that also make our lives convenient and uphold us, and therefore we will spin our wheels. And I'm not, even though I am very much on board with ACEs science, I can definitely see that being the case with ACEs movements, just because, data and any type, no matter how awesome and great a study is done and is conducted, we will still look at that data, and through our racist and biased lens, we will then still enact interventions through our racist and biased lens. We will still implement those interventions through our racist and biased lens. And until we deal with the racist and biased lens, then all the things that we will do will be sort of corrupted, no matter how good our intentions are. And so I think that this will be an issue that will continue because in my interactions, people are not ready to really buck the systems. And they're not also ready really to look internally and think about the ways in which that they are racist or biased.
Thank you. And I should say that we as an organization are fortunate to have Ingrid leading us into understanding how we are racist and biased. And I have to tell you, it's been very eye-opening. And I greatly appreciate all the work you've done with us personally, Ingrid, as well as all the work that you're doing in the world. And I absolutely agree that has to be front and center, and it has to be integrated with ACEs science. Otherwise, we won't get where we want to go. I want to transition now to Terry Allison, who is from Santa Barbara. She was one of the co-founders of Resilient Santa Barbara, and has been around from the very beginning in their efforts. And they really started off with a bang, I have to say. They had their first annual meeting in 2016, and then they had to find a bigger place to have it in 2017, 2018. Of course, 2020, they couldn't have it in person because of COVID, but I think that Terry will agree that contrary to what a lot of people thought, people really didn't shut down so much after the pandemic started, but said we're more determined than ever to figure out a way to keep the work going. So Terry, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Ingrid. That was very well put, and it got me thinking. So I hope I can stay focused on what I'm supposed to talk to you all about. What my background is in early care and education. And one of the things that was really important to me, I used to run a childcare center for homeless and at-risk preschoolers, was as teachers, we're taught to manage behavior. And one of the things that we really want to do is understand behavior. Behavior has meaning. And so what is behind the behavior when we're looking at kids and families and things like that? So I've been interested in ACEs for a very long time and was able to join a good friend of mine, Barb Finch, who's unable to be on this call today, and she probably would do a better job of explaining it. She has been the leader, but I just want to share a little bit about how we got started and what we did. And as Jane said, I have a couple of little slides here because for you visual learners, it'll be much easier. So what Jane said is we had our Child Abuse Prevention Council was exploring ACEs. We're lucky to live in a community with a university, UC Santa Barbara, and we have a child abuse prevention agency here in town, and the neighborhood clinics, our neighborhood clinics were looking into ACEs and screening kind of all at the same time. And then the conference that Jane had referenced, our Bridges to Resilience conference, which Jane was a keynote speaker at one of them, we all started coming together and we started looking at, what can we do and how as a community can we connect together? And so we showed this film Resilience, we had another conference, and what we noticed was that we were all, and then Nadine Burke-Harris came, there was 1,000 people that joined through the UCSB Arts and Lectures program. And so what we were noticing though, is that, we were still looking at the agency being the center of our work. And then we're trying to connect with all these other agencies and bring them all together. And so we formed a steering committee that actually started to take some deep looks about how we were in community and how we were working together as networks. And so this is one of my all-time favorite slides from in service that I went to. And, we had some really hard conversations about, what were our networks, scattered fragments, and how were we connected and how were we going to intentionally connect with each other so that we weren't duplicating services and that we were all working together and doing what our strengths were, and not everybody having to do it. So the steering committee wrestled with this one for a while, and then we looked at, we came together and we agreed on some principles and objectives. How would we be together? And then what we were going to do together. And we actually, when we meet, we revisit those regularly. So we launched Resilient Santa Barbara County, and 24 organizations have signed on. And, and this is kind of where we are right now, is that the Resilient Santa Barbara County is the center of our work. And then, the second circle out, like right here, are all the, all the agencies and sectors that we're looking at. And then this final one are networks. How are we connecting the networks that already exist? And, and how can we come together? So in my little 5 minutes there, it sounds wonderful, but there are challenges. We're really working hard not to duplicate. We're really looking at how can we make this culturally relevant to all of the people in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara, we think we're this big metropolitan, place, and we're really quite small, and everybody kind of overlaps. So it's easy to fall into some complacency, and so we're really trying to look and address, what do individual neighborhoods need? How are we going to, it's not one size fits all, and Jane, you and I were talking about what, that we're in this for the long haul. Ingrid, I was really appreciative of that we keep throwing money at things and putting band-aids on things. And this is a huge systemic issue that we're looking at. And so we're really wanting to form these great connections so that we can really systemically make a difference in what we're doing here in Santa Barbara. And then just kind of finally, our Bridges to Resilience conference is happening, but it's going to be virtual. So be on the lookout for that. We're kind of working on it now. We're not exactly sure what it's going to look like. And then we're really excited to be part of the ACES Connection community. And then further on is joining the ACES Connection Cooperative of Communities so that we can all learn together. And Jane, I'm so appreciative that you started that so that our different communities throughout the country and throughout our state can come together and look at these problems. So thanks so much for having me, and I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks so much, Terry. You said you had 23 organizations now?
Yeah, 24. So there's, so there are actual individuals. We have some individuals who've joined the movement. We have organizations, and then we have some networks. So the neighborhood clinics, the county health department. There are, Barb gave me some notes that I can actually tell you that, and we have some through the county of Santa Barbara, the actual county, the Department of Social Services, some individual departments have signed on. So it's not just mental health or behavioral wellness. In the medical community, it's actually the Department of Social Services and other departments that are coming together and actually taking a look at it as well.
Wonderful. I will, why don't we go back to, seeing everybody, thanks. That was really interesting, Terry. And I think that the work that you've been doing and how you've been getting people together has been pretty remarkable. We were supposed to have Brian Simpson on here also, but we're not exactly. He's got a family emergency, so that's our, he won't be here. But I did want to give some information about what's happening in Fresno, because they took a little bit different tack than you all did in Santa Barbara, Terry. They decided, instead of going strictly agency, it was mostly small community-based organizations. The bulk of it was, and they decided to go to the health department, which is huge, as well as the education department, which is enormous, last. And I think they have something like, it's over 100 organizations now that are part of their grassroots community organization. And they have made extraordinary progress in being able to make sure that they are actually dealing with some of the problems that are closest to the ground that maybe take a little bit longer to bubble up in the agency world. So we have had Brian on before, and I'm sure we'll have him on again, but yeah, they're doing remarkable work there in Fresno. I want to just give you a little bit more information before we go to questions. Our goal, as I've said before, is to make sure that every organization and every community in the United States is integrating this. And I know it's going to be a process, and I know it's not going to go as fast as I would like, but our job is to push that. and to be nice about it while we're doing it too, or to be trauma informed. But we really feel that there's no time to waste. And I want to tell you about a report that the RAND Corporation recently put out, within the last couple of months. And it just blew my mind and showed me that we need to incorporate other parts of what we do in the work we do in the ACES science community. And that is that we haven't really addressed economics so much. And this report got me to thinking we have to form a bond between the ACES movement and folks in the economic community. This report showed that since the 1970s, the top 1% of the people in this country transferred $50 trillion out of the hands of the bottom 90%. $50 trillion went from the bottom 90 to the top 1% since the 1970s, and that was just changing policy. And that puts a big lie to the idea that there's trickle-down economics. This all went gushing up, a waterfall going backwards in my mind. But if the economic policies that were in place in the 70s were in place now, that people who were earning $50,000 a year now would be earning $100,000 a year now. It's that much a difference. And I'm not saying anything about inflation. This is just dollars to dollars. So that much money went. You know, we wouldn't be in the dire straits now, dire straits that we are in now, if that hadn't happened. And the thing about this is that no amount of philanthropy or people trying to help the poor or anything like that will work until those policies change. And, you know, to Ingrid's point, these are really racist policies and policies of inequity, you know, that have resulted in this transfer. And I think that we have a lot of work to do to reverse that, but it has to be going on at the same time as all this other work that we're doing to try to change the world. And I think that I'm going to be starting to reach out to this group of this community of economists who believe that we do have to change this, that our economics are definitely racist, and we have to do something about it. And we actually don't have much time to waste because climate change, as we are experiencing, is upon us. And if we make decisions in our reptile brain instead of our thinking brain with the things that we have to address with climate change, we are absolutely going to fail for our children and grandchildren and beyond. But I don't think we have to. I think that we can make changes, and we can make them quickly. So I want to leave you, before we get to questions, with a quote that James Baldwin said. He said, "What is it you want me to reconcile myself to? I was born here nearly 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time, my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brothers and sisters' time, my nieces and nephews' time. How much time do you want for your progress?" And I don't think we have that time. And I think we can take much more advantage of the time that we have than we have in the past. And it's due to all of you here and people who have the same interests that we can actually make a big change. So with that, I would love to take questions. And if Terry and Ingrid and Kathleen would be available for questions too, that would be wonderful.
I actually, oh, it's doing a weird echo thing for me. Does it sound echoey to you?
It doesn't sound echoey, it sounds gravelly.
Gravelly? Okay. I was going to ask a question myself, just because so Terry and I live in the same area here in California. I actually live right on the border of Santa Barbara County. I'm in South San Luis Obispo County. And I can't help but think about the fact that we're addressing racism. We're also talking about Santa Barbara. And Santa Barbara, as well as San Luis Obispo, are two of the whitest counties in all of California. And so, not to put you on the spot, Terry, but I just wonder how it is that you can address these types of issues when it seems like a much larger issue. I mean, personally, because I grew up in this area, I have seen racism masquerade as liberal values. So, for example, one way that I've seen that is environmentalism, and saying we don't want to develop, we don't want to build housing because we want to preserve land, because we're good liberal environmentalists. And to me, I've really seen those types of policies as racist, because they're keeping certain populations from being able to afford to live here. So I just wanted to start with that question, because to me, it's like the elephant in the room. It's like, okay, we're talking about Santa Barbara, we're talking about racism. It's like, wow, you know?
Yeah, I'm not the expert on it, but one of the things is we have been looking at it, and there's, besides the indigenous, because the Shumash here, the Shumash reservation is here, and many immigrants from many places in Mexico and South America coming in the Mixteco community as well is here. And then, we're all, and there is not a large African-American Black population here, but, they're in our, so we've been looking at reciprocity. Like, what can we do together? We're not just going to invite you to the table because of your background or things like that. We're inviting you to the table to teach us, and so we've really been reaching out to some of the community partners that we don't generally reach, and really looking at, unfortunately, I go to meetings and I say, you all, I don't want to keep going to meetings where there's people looking like me. We need to, I've been around a long time, and we need to really look at who we're inviting, and going outside of our circles to be able to go beyond what we know. And so, we're tipping our toe in the water, but we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
I know you're, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but just was curious.
No, it's good. We're really wrestling with, all of these questions, and, looking at it, really trying to look at it really deeply. So yeah, I appreciate that question.
I did look up the numbers before I asked, just because I love numbers. And Santa Barbara County is 75% white, 1% Black, and 3.5% Native American.
Wow. Yeah. And it affects, so, that's, I will take that back to our group, but it does affect how, and one of the things that I think we need to look at is how we influence others around us. We're not just this isolated community. So what can we learn from communities beyond ourselves as well, to better inform the work that we do? So yeah, so thank you for that.
Thanks, Terry.
Yeah.
So let's see. I see a lot of comments that are just like really grateful. So everyone's saying thank you. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions so far, just a lot of gratitude and just general comments about the conversation. So Adriana, you had a lot of good comments. I'm gonna unmute you. Did that work?
Hello. Hello, I have got a lot of comments, but the last comment I made was that racism is covers all races, and sometimes we forget the other smaller minority groups, you know, when we're in the fight for the major groups. And I think structural racism covers a lot. I also made a comment about that we get locked into dependency by the system. So we become dependent on the system for our money and that. And that's sort of like being locked in prison, and it sort of locks us out from accessing power and resources by being dependent on the state. So, you know, we have to look at those systems too, that even though we give, we're not actually empowering and enabling people to access those things. So that's what we have to think of when we are giving all the time to people, that we also empower them so that they can do it for themselves instead of give. Yeah.
That's a really good point, Adriana. And that's actually why we set up the ACES Connection Cooperative of Communities, because our long-term goal, because we understand so well that this is a 10, 20, 30, 40-year endeavor for communities, that we want the movement to be self-sustaining and not only have rely on philanthropy. The philanthropy is wonderful to start things, but eventually they expect you to stand on your own 2 feet, which makes sense. So we figured out a way to actually create those feet, if you will. So we have 4 members of the co-op, which we just launched not too long ago. And we'll be, you know, our goal is to have several thousand, so that the movement can start supporting itself in all levels. So it's small amounts, which is the hardest thing for nascent communities to get, that early $5,000 or $10,000, all the way up to more substantial amounts of money. But you know, it's a process, but that is our goal, because you know, who would know better than people in the ACES movement what we need, and that's not to say that, you know, we don't welcome philanthropy, but I think that we can make sure that we stay where philanthropy is interested, which is where the new things are, the new developments. How are we actually making things happen, and how can we do this so that you know, people do get on their own 2 feet.
Karen had a question.
Thanks, Allison. And I've been enjoying the conversation. It's very diverse. It's going in many directions, and they're all really important. I'm just wondering, as I'm especially thinking about Allison's question about representation, if we might have a silver lining in COVID, in that we can now, just as we're doing right this moment, we can participate virtually in ways we never could before, and have opportunities to bring people together. And it's sort of been normalized. So anyways, I don't have a super formed question, but I'm just wondering if we can leverage this time in a positive way, right? COVID's quite negative. There's a lot of negative components, but maybe this is a little glimmer of a silver lining that we might want to be mindful of and elevate if it's helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Ingrid, do you have a response?
Yeah, I think that we should definitely use the time to reflect as a whole. And my experience, again, is mostly in America. So I think the fact that America is a very developed country that is really struggling with COVID-19 is a reflection of a lot of past historical issues coming to fruition right now, being very well aware of the disparities in certain communities, the historical trauma across the board. We tend to think of historical trauma for just people of color, but white people also have historical trauma that manifest in lots of different ways, but overwhelmingly in a lack of empathy or this individualistic ideology that is very focused on individual freedoms and things of that nature, that gets us to the point where we are having debates on wearing masks and just a lot of, you know, things that are just really indicative of the mindset, ideology, values, and beliefs. You know, the explicit spoken ones, but also the unspoken ones. And I think that this is really kind of, you know, putting it out there. And now that we're able to see it, maybe now that it's more in our conscious awareness, maybe now that we can then really focus on addressing those issues, along with not just the disparities or the inequities or, you know, issues around poverty, but also just the overall, you know, beliefs and values that we have as a country.
Perfectly said. Thank you so much, Ingrid. That's a great ending note. Jane, I'll turn it over to you. Maybe we want to get some, just maybe a couple closing words from Terry and Kathleen.
Yeah, so thank you all for coming. And I love the way many of the same people show up every week. And for those of you who are new, you know, please come to our other Better Normals. We started this after the pandemic started, and because people were talking about wanting to have go back to normal, and we said that isn't so good for most people. We want a better normal, so that's what we're all about here. Kathleen, do you have something you want to say at the end here?
Oh, let's see.
Mute. Okay. No, sorry about that. And I'm moving you can tell, would never know that I've been on, you know, working from home for 8 months with the way I deal with my technology. Anyway, it's so nice to see all of you. And again, I just really appreciate the hard work that you do on the ground to try and address the impact of ACEs and toxic stress. And I hope that we'll all be brave and have really honest conversations about race in this country and deep institutional racism that does exist, that permeates society, and that is causing so much devastation within communities of color and impacting health and well-being so deeply for all of us. I hope that we can just be brave and ask hard questions and listen. And I appreciate, Jane, this opportunity to be here with all of you today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for coming. Terry, any last words?
You know, just to thank you for having me. And one of the things I was thinking as we were talking is the older I get, the more I can stay in being uncomfortable and pushing the edges. And so, you know, I'm thank you for the opportunity to be thinking outside the box. And I think that the ACEs work and all the stuff that we do to be not only trauma informed, but trauma responsive. And really the big difference that can make. So, you know, thanks for squirming me in my chair, Allison.
Sorry about that.
No, I'm just kidding. It was great. It was great.
Okay. You're welcome then.
Ingrid, any last words?
If you haven't voted and you're in America, go vote.
All right, great, thank you. And as someone put in the chat here, you know, we have a lot of hope and for a better normal, and we're going for it. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all so much. Just a reminder to save the chat before I close out by clicking the 3 dots and then clicking save chat. And that way you can access all the links and resources that were in the chat, including next Tuesday's A Better Normal, in which we will go over our own internal race and equity process. So that link is there and you can register for that. We hope to see you there.